Hello, book lovers. I'm Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novel Atomic Anna, and you're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. Check This Out is a series where I interview emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. A series brought to you by New Hampshire Public Radio and the PenFaulkner Foundation. PenFaulkner administers major literary awards and public programs, including the PenFaulkner Award for Fiction. Believe it or not, this is our last episode of Season 4. It's been an incredible 12 weeks packed with lots of exciting books and authors, and I will be back in the fall with a brand new season, again jam-packed with 12 more emerging writers. You can listen to any episode on NHPR.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Today on my show is Lucas Schaefer, and we are discussing his brand new debut novel, The Slip. Lucas, hi, welcome to Check This Out.
Rachel, thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful to be here.
The Slip was magnificent and mind-blowing. The novel has just the right amount of absurd mixed with the sublime, and I could not put it down. When I start to explain it, you might think it sounds crazy, because it does. But stay with me, because this is what made this novel so good. The novel, The Slip, revolves around Nathaniel Rothstein of Newton, Massachusetts, who sets off to live with his Uncle Bob in Austin for the summer of 1998. While there, he volunteers at a rehab center for the elderly and starts spending time at a boxing gym. Nathaniel's in a bad place, and boxing, the gym, start to save him. He also finds a mentor in his boss and soon falls in love with a woman he's never even met. A woman named Sasha, who is at the other end of a 1-900 phone sex hotline. Everything is looking up for him, and then he disappears. The Slip fast forwards and tells his story, going back and forth in time and presenting all the events that transpire around the disappearance and after. This wild story is wrapped up with an incredible cast of characters, including, all right, get ready for this, a rookie female cop, a Playboy model turned beautician and her transitioning son, an evil clown, and many, many more. The author, Lucas Schaefer, tackles race, gender, and sex head-on, and it left me spinning around questions of identity. How do boys become men? And how badly do we all just want to be somebody? But who? Like I said, this book is bonkers and magnificent, and I can't wait to talk about it with my guest today, Lucas Schaefer. All right, Lucas, I have tried to describe this novel, The Slip, the best I can, but it is bonkers. It is magnificent. How do you describe it, though? I mean, how do you distill it down to your elevator pitch?
Yeah, I mean, I think the plot, Rachel, you nailed. That's pretty much how I do talk about it. But I've described it in a couple ways. I've talked about it as Karate Kid gone wrong, in that there's this relationship between Nathaniel Rothstein and his mentor, David DeLeese, who's this Haitian-born immigrant to Texas who's lived in Texas for about 30 years and really takes Nathaniel under his wing, but things go pretty sideways quickly. I've also talked about it as kind of a revenge of the side characters story, in that I think all of the characters in this novel, even the evil clown, have sort of felt like society has not taken them seriously, or they've been marginalized, or they're sort of not the protagonists in their own story. And in The Slip, they're saying, not today, I'm going to be the protagonist, and they're sort of all fighting for space on the page. And it leads to, as you say, some bonkers things.
So what is it really about? Like, sometimes we say, what's your book about, your elevator pitch, but what is it really about? So what is it really about to you?
I think this book is really about identity and how identity can be fluid and how we can find power in our different identities and also lack of power. And it's largely about race. It's not exclusively about race as a subject, but I used to be a teacher. I was a 7th grade teacher for a number of years, so I've been around a lot of students and was, of course, a student myself. And I'm interested in this idea of how white people and white kids in this story can both really aspire toward blackness and have many black role models in media and in sports, and also be a little bit racist or have views that are make you go, ooh, I don't want them thinking this. How did those things work in concert? And the book's about a lot of different identities, but at its core, I do think the racial element and how Nathaniel, who is white, and David, who is black, both really have genuine affection for each other and also behave toward each other in ways I think most people will find problematic or questionable. That tension really inspired a lot of the book.
So introduce us to your debut novel, The Slip, by reading for us, please.
Sure. So I'm just going to read a quick section that describes our protagonist, Nathaniel Rothstein. It was his nebulous nature that had drawn him to theater in the first place. He thrilled at the decisiveness of it, the magic of watching one person become another fully formed. The Newton South Stars musical that spring had been Man of La Mancha, a play within a play. Nathaniel had gone a little misty on opening night when floppy-haired Ben Schumann, in the lead, bent his back and administered his old man makeup center stage, transforming from Cervantes into Don Quixote right before their eyes. He was careful not to let anyone notice. So bottled was the boy that, back at the start of rehearsals, he'd found himself unable even to purchase the soundtrack, mortified at how the coal-eyed salesgirl at Newberry Comics would react if he submitted so fey an offering. He'd slipped the CD into the pouch of his hoodie and bought an Oasis album instead, reasoning that if he purchased something, no one would suspect him of shoplifting. The maneuver worked so well that Nathaniel repeated it multiple times that spring, keeping the unwanted CDs naked in his desk drawer, hiding the musicals under the manlier guises of Radiohead and The Prodigy. Now the naked baby of Nirvana's Nevermind served as a literal cover for Little Shop of Horrors, while Nathaniel's 40 ounces to freedom jewel case couldn't shut all the way, since around its plastic hub he'd forced the original cast recording of Rent Discs 1 and 2. But La Mancha was his favorite, and back in Newton he'd taken to pacing his room to the soundtrack, Discman tucked in the elastic waistband of his mesh shorts, door locked, too self-conscious to mouth the words, fearful of even a single note escaping him. All this would have been news to Linda Rothstein. Whenever his mother fished for details, Nathaniel's stock response was that the technical aspects were what led him to techiedom. I don't know, Mom. The lightboard's just, cool. In truth, he'd never touched the lightboard, set foot in the light booth. By the time of La Mancha, he'd ascended only to assistant prop master, a position usually held by freshmen. This suited Nathaniel fine. The pleasure was in the watching and the imagining born of that. How badly he wanted to be somebody else.
Thank you. That is Nathaniel Rothstein. There he is, right? The main character of your debut novel, The Slip. So Nathaniel is from Newton, Massachusetts. You are from Newton, Massachusetts.
Yes.
How many parallels are there? How much of Nathaniel is there in you?
So it's funny. I mean, Nathaniel demographically is very similar to me. He went to Newton South High School, which is where I went to high school. He's Jewish. I'm Jewish. He's white. I'm white. After that, we diverge. I had a pretty fun high school experience. I was on stage in plays, not behind stage like Nathaniel. And, even among the stage crew kids who are this proud band of outcasts, Nathaniel is an outcast among them. But I was also, a gay kid who was closeted at the time. And so I think some of that feeling of not fully being yourself or wanting to be someone else or more true to yourself, that I was able to channel into Nathaniel Rothstein, who really is having a tough time when we first meet him.
So you take Nathaniel Rothstein from Newton, Massachusetts, and you ship him off to Austin, Texas, right, where he's going to spend the summer with his uncle because his single mom doesn't know what else to do with him. He gets into a fight, the police are involved, and so he shows up in Texas, and he has this new mentor, and he takes to boxing. How did you come up with this plot? I have to be honest, I don't usually ask authors this question because I, as a writer, often feel like, I don't know, it just came from my brain, right? It just I had this crazy idea. But I am dying to ask you, how did you get the idea for all of these characters, side characters, this whole book?
When I first moved to Austin, which is where I live now, I was 24. I'm now 42. And I didn't really know anyone. I'd kind of moved for no reason. I wanted to try something new and see a different part of the country. And very early on, I started taking evening classes at a boxing gym, which was not something I'd ever been interested in before, really just as a way to meet people. And I was so enamored by this gym. The gym I went to is called Lord's Boxing Gym. It's still around in Austin. It's a little bit of an Austin institution. And part of what I loved was the workout. I mean, it's if you've ever done a boxing workout, you feel great afterwards. You don't always feel great during. But the other thing I loved about it was everyone was at this gym. Every age, every race, every profession, every personality type, including some you didn't necessarily want to be around, and many others you did, every body type. And everyone was kind of working together, not working together. There were opportunities that came from being in this melting pot. There were tensions that arose. I mean, there aren't that many places in Austin, in Texas, in America where everyone is coming together like that. There are all of these lines of race and sex and gender and geography that normally separate us. And the gym was a place where that didn't exist. And that always fascinated me. And I always wanted to explore that. And the other thing about moving from Massachusetts to Texas is that my experience with Massachusetts, I mean, I'm from Newton, it's much more buttoned up than Texas. And a story I always like to tell is that when I first came to Austin, I had a friend who ran a nonprofit, and Bill Clinton was speaking as a guest of honor. And I showed up in a dark suit because it was the former president. And people thought I was in the Secret Service. There were people in Hawaiian shirts. There were people in flip-flops. There were people in shorts. So I was like, I'm never leaving this place. This is great. But in coming up with this story, you know, Nathaniel is someone who wears a giant Patriots hoodie because he's embarrassed about his body. He's just not dressed down in the way Austin is. And I thought, this is the sort of character we need to plop into Austin, who's just going to be so uncomfortable with the slightly more laid back vibe of the place. And so those were two of the ways that this book came about. And the third thing I'll tell you is that I had a job when I was in high school as a bellhop. And my sort of supervisor, the sort of head door person at this hotel, was a little bit like David in that he was a wonderful mentor, but he did something that David does in the novel that's very core to how the plot gets moving, which is he would tell these very sexually explicit stories to me, things he had allegedly done. As in the novel, like, who knows? But, you know, I was 16, I was in the closet. I always really loved him, but found this particular part of our relationship just completely baffling. I wasn't around guys who really talked like that. I think had I, it wouldn't have been so shocking, but I was always like, why is he doing this? And that was a question that sort of got me going with David and Nathaniel. So all of that mixed in to kind of create this world of Terry Tucker's boxing gym.
I absolutely love your observation in the gym, and what you've really taken from being in that boxing gym is that you have people of all different shapes, sizes, backgrounds, like a little bit of everyone in the world shows up at a boxing gym. And you really dig into this question of, well, what is the sport or boxing or being at a gym really about? And I thought that you wrote about that really, really well in the book. Would you read for us? And you actually give us a moment inside of David's head and what the sport means and where you're really taking us with this novel.
Of course. The fight clock issues its final warning, 30 seconds left in David's final round. Now it isn't about what he's throwing or how he's throwing it. The goal is to keep going, don't stop. And as he does this, he becomes, for as long as he's punching, that other version of himself. In this moment, David is no longer the director of hospitality at Shoal Creek Rehabilitation. He is David the future lawyer, the one-day businessman, the someday therapist. David the maybe not a tomato can who takes it 9 rounds in Alvarado and wakes the next morning, bruised but ready for more. In this moment, he is David the fighter who knows, who knew way back in 1973, back when he threw his first punch, that his true strength doesn't live in his arms or his legs, his thighs, his feet, not in any one part, but in his whole self, who understands the secret hunger that makes his body move. Around him, the denizens of Terry Tucker's boxing gym go at it as he goes at it. 15 seconds, 10 seconds. They hear what he hears, the machine gun fire of wrapped wrists against speed bag, the squeak of fight shoes pivoting on canvas, leather against flesh. They release themselves from themselves. What if?
Thanks so much for reading that. I really loved this passage because it just seemed to be the essence of this question around identity that your novel, The Slip, goes back to again and again. What if, right? And these dreams that Nathaniel has for himself. What can he become? What can you do? And that moment you capture in the ring, in the gym, really brings us to that idea of what can I be?
And it's especially true, I think, in boxing of all sports, because boxing, I think, is a little closer to a meritocracy than a lot of sports. Like, you don't need to belong to a country club with a pool. You don't need golf clubs. You don't need a tennis racket. You don't need equipment. You need your legs and your arms and your brain. And that to me is the perfect setting for all of these identity questions because some of the things that hold us back in wider society wouldn't necessarily at the gym. And so this is a place where this is a canvas where people are exploring what they could be, what the potential is, how they see themselves in their mind. What if I could make that real? And that's sort of at the core of this book.
If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. My guest today is Lucas Schaefer, and we are talking about his brand new debut novel, The Slip. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. Lucas, so we are talking about the gym, the boxing gym, which is really the center of your debut novel, The Slip. And you create a huge web of characters that all have a connection somehow to this boxing gym, right? And the people that are there and not there. How did you come up with these characters and map them out? Could you just sort of take me through how this all came together for you?
Sure. So when I first started this book, I thought that I was writing like a linked story collection. I'd really loved Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan, which is a linked collection all about the music community. And I thought, I'm going to do this for boxing. And what I didn't realize at the time was that to write a short story, you have to write things that are short, which is not the case with my writing style or with this book. But what was great about it is, though a lot of that material did not end up in the book, I did create this huge cast of characters who I fell in love with and found ways to sort of reappropriate when I basically started from scratch with a novel. So I'd already written about Belinda St. James, who's this Playboy model turned beautician, and her son, Charles Rex, who is a 16-year-old like Nathaniel and having a lot of confusion about his gender identity. I'd already written Carlos Ortega, who's kind of this gym rat who I think a version of him exists in every gym in America, just someone who's giving everyone else a hard time and in their face and doesn't seem to have a job. He, I think, claims to be in the flooring business or the roofing, but is always sort of at the gym. So I had this big cast of characters, and it was just a question of, okay, what do I do with these people now that I know them so well?
And the book really focuses on 2 characters, I think. I mean, you have this extraordinary cast of side characters, but really the focus for me was Nathaniel and Dave. And Nathaniel is the 16-year-old from Newton, Massachusetts, who's sent off sort of to rehab in a sense at his uncle's house in Austin, Texas. And Dave, who is his mentor, who's literally his boss at this rehab facility. And Dave tells these wildly inappropriate stories, but he's also incredibly disappointed in who he's become and who he is at this moment. Can you talk about the dynamics of those two? Because for me, Dave and Nathaniel were both disappointed in themselves, both sad, both reaching for someone. And I wanted to hear you talk about them. How did you think about them?
Yeah, so David DeLeese, who is the mentor character, immigrated to Austin from Haiti about 30 years before. He had a scholarship at an all black college. And he's just a character who didn't quite. I mean, one thing about him is he's actually doing pretty well. He has a good job, he has a happy marriage, he lives in a nice place, but he just didn't accomplish his dreams and his ambitions and always wanted something bigger for himself. He's basically an activities director at this nursing home and has spent 30 years with this mostly white population of nursing home residents who love him, but there's always been some element of condescension or racism or marginalization. And he's also, and this I think is really key to understanding him, he also has this history in boxing as a tomato can. And what a tomato can is a boxer who basically is put in the ring so that up and coming fighters who need a lot of knockouts on their records, who want a good record going into bigger fights, he's the person who loses. He doesn't lose intentionally, but Nathaniel doesn't really see any of that or know any of that. What he sees is this really brash, confident black man. I mean, part of David's whole thing is he's larger than life and he's over the top, not only with Nathaniel, but also with the residents. And that's not really who he is or his entire personality, but it's a little bit of an armor in order to deal with all of these people. And Nathaniel just doesn't understand any of this. He just sees this person who he really wants to become. And David suddenly has this protege who's really interested in becoming him. So that's very exhilarating. Like, oh my God, this kid wants to be me. Let's kind of go with that. And so on its face, there's nothing necessarily wrong with any of that, but Nathaniel then takes it to another level.
One of the early boxing moves that Dave teaches Nathaniel is the slip or how to slip punches. Could you read that brief paragraph where you talk about that?
Of course, one night David tried to teach Nathaniel how to slip punches. It was a simple seaming maneuver, a slight shift of the head to avoid an incoming blow. Like everything in boxing, this simplicity was an illusion. The slip was a full body movement. When you slip, you should feel a twist in your torso, David instructed. Keep your hands up, bend your knees.
That is the big metaphor for the book. It is the title. It is the key point. Talk about the slip, this idea.
Sure. So, I mean, one of the reasons I like the title is it obviously has so many different meanings. But in addition to in boxing, you can give someone the slip, sort of disappear. That's what all of the characters in this book, in one way or another, are doing. They're giving themselves the slip, they're giving each other the slip. There's a lot of sort of transforming into people they want to be, they thought they'd be, they didn't know they were. And so that's kind of where the boxing metaphor comes in.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. My guest today is Lucas Schaefer, and we are talking about his brand new debut novel, The Slip. Up until now, this book is a little bit crazy, really amazing, but now we're going bonkers. Now we are going to talk about the part where Nathaniel Rothstein starts calling a 1-900 hotline and falls in love with the worker on the other side of that phone line, Sasha. Talk to us about Sasha.
Well, Sasha, we don't know much about to start. She's sort of this Russian vixen. And Nathaniel has been calling this hotline when we enter the story for a few days. He found the hotline number on the back of the Austin Independent paper, and he has a check card that his grandma gave him for Hanukkah. And so he calls this line, and up until Sasha, the women on this line have really taken the lead because Nathaniel doesn't know how to talk about sex or how to talk to these ladies. But when he calls Sasha, Sasha is requesting that he be more assertive, and he doesn't really know how to do it. And eventually, what he does is he starts imitating David, his mentor. He's pretending to be black. He eventually pretends to be Haitian as well. It gets a little more complicated. And they have this sort of ecstatic sexual encounter. And in the middle of the night, he gets a phone call, and it is the 1-900 hotline calling him back because Sasha had so much fun with Nathaniel that she wants to go another round. So there's this initial mystery of like, how did this woman get his phone number? Like, what is going on? And they basically from there develop this relationship.
And they're on the phone, and it turns out that they're both pretending to be somebody they're not. We really have no idea who Sasha is. And Nathaniel is pretending to be David, who he says at first is a Jamaican black man, but then he admits actually he's Haitian. So there's lots of identity slipping, and no one really is who they seem to be, but they still sort of start to fall for one another. And their relationship just gets more and more complicated, or they become closer and closer. They keep talking all the time.
Yes, they develop a very intense, strictly over the phone relationship. One of the reasons I think they like each other, and this relates to many of the characters in the book, is all of these people in the slip, they feel so marginalized, lonely, just like they don't fit in one way or another, and have this kind of no one could, possibly know what this is like feeling. And that's, of course, ironically, what unites all of them. And that's what unites Nathaniel and Sasha. They're both these outsiders who feel like they don't really fit in, which really is all of us to varying degrees.
This is where the book really goes bonkers. I absolutely love it. Sasha says, "Let's meet up." And Nathaniel says, "Okay." But of course, Nathaniel Rothstein is a white kid from Massachusetts who said that he is a black man, right, from Haiti. So he has a problem. So what does he do?
Yes, this is a very teenage problem in that he, didn't quite think this through. So Nathaniel starts reading up on Haiti. He has a World Book Encyclopedia in the room where he is staying, and he decides if he can just darken his skin a little bit. It doesn't need to be that convincing, but just a little. So he starts going to a tanning salon and experiments with some different ways to do this without really thinking deeply about it other than like, how do I get my skin to darken?
So you write, thus began the darkening of Nathaniel Rothstein.
Yes, so this is right. This is where things go really astray for Nathaniel and for a number of different people in the book.
This whole idea that he wants to become a black man or just dark enough that he can pass. I don't even know the last time that I read a character or anybody trying to do this. What kind of pushback and reaction have you gotten to this idea?
I wouldn't say I've gotten a lot of pushback. I mean, obviously, I knew it was a provocative idea. And so a lot of thought went into how to do it. But I think the question was both like, how do I embody Nathaniel and understand his point of view and what he's doing, and also sort of put what he's doing in a larger context? He sees something a little bit wrong. He has this inkling that this is not a good thing to be doing. And there's some, it's 1998, so he's just exploring search engines and the internet and kind of figuring things out that way. But, I wrote the book with a lot of intention, is what I would say. My hope is as people read it, yes, they're provoked in some ways, but, I didn't write it to be contrarian or just to say, oh, look what I can do. I was really interested in this dynamic between Nathaniel and David and just explored it and went for it. And one of the thoughts I had in my mind as I was writing is I think when you're a white writer who is writing about people of different races, especially black people, given historical dynamics, I think there can be a tendency to feel like I'm going to make this person almost exceptional or perfect or have no flaws, because that's my way of sort of having this diverse cast, but also not being offensive or stereotyping. But that of course, is dehumanizing in its own way because none of us are perfect and we all make mistakes. And so I really, with David, wanted to create a character who was just fully formed and fully fleshed out. And that meant having him do things that you really cringe at, and it meant having Nathaniel do things that you really cringe at. You know, there are a couple lines in this book where early readers said, oh God, maybe cut this one. Like, do we need Nathaniel thinking this? Do we need Nathaniel saying it? And my question was always, would Nathaniel think it and would Nathaniel say it? And if the answer was yes, it stayed in because there wasn't a way to talk about this complicated relationship and to explore this weird dynamic without letting both of them just do things that we don't want them to do.
I definitely cringed when I read that. Thus began the darkening of Nathaniel Rothstein. And yet I went with it because, like you said, it was such a 16-year-old idea. Like, if I can only tan myself more or burn my skin enough that maybe it would turn darker. And exploring all the flaws and everything that was bound up in that idea was very brave and really well done. And I just kept thinking, are we really going there? We're really going there, as a 16-year-old would.
Yeah. And that was part of it too, was really trying to bring myself back to being 16 because the two 16-year-old characters in this, Charles Rex and Nathaniel, are both driven much more often by emotion and, daring than necessarily thinking every step through. And that leads to some bad things, but it also leads to some really wonderful things because I think in life, as adults, we don't take that risk. I mean, I'm not encouraging people to start tanning to look black, but we're more constrained, right? We're more intellectualizing everything. And there's something fun about adolescence just being like, let's just go for it.
You have a lot of characters in this book that are trying to be someone that they're not. Dave presents himself as Jamaican when he's Haitian. And then you have one of the patients at this nursing facility who was born Italian American and wanted to be plain old white American, becomes Dr. Robertson until she shows up at the nursing home. She's also hiding.
Yes, so Gloria Abruzzi, who sort of plays a small but pivotal role in the book, is this 74-year-old retired psychologist from New York who's moved to Austin to be closer to her son in this nursing home where David works. And she, for her whole life, her siblings really embraced their Italianness much more than she did. And then when she's in the nursing home, all of the aspects of her identity that have been so important to her, being a psychologist, being a woman who's a psychologist at a time when there aren't many women at the hospital where she works, all of these things start to fall away. And she's kind of grasping for who she is. And suddenly she goes like full in to being Italian. And that leads to its own complications within the plot.
But again and again, you take us back to identity, and every character wants to be somebody. They just don't know who yet, or they think they know, and it's this big journey. And this takes us to one of my favorite characters, Charles Rex, or X, as he comes to be known as. Tell us about Charles Rex.
So Charles Rex, he is 16. He lives with his mother, Belinda St. James. She was previously a Playboy bunny. She then became a beautician, and she also works on the side at a 1-900 hotline. And Charles Rex, at the beginning of his sophomore year, decides that he is going to start going by X because he doesn't feel like a Charles Rex. And part of the interesting thing and also fun of writing in 1998 is that this is a kid who is exploring transness and gender identity, but is not privy to any national conversation about those issues. So any of the conversations we're having now about pronouns, about trans people in society, Charles Rex has just never heard of any of this. And so at the beginning of sophomore year, he starts going by X, this sort of gender neutral name, and he substitutes out his backpack for like a beach bag and just starts really experimenting more with his gender. And he has a best friend, Margaret Clanahan, who's kind of this husky musical theater girl who is his sidekick, and they're kind of tooling around Austin, causing mischief and finding themselves as 16-year-olds do.
And he becomes Sasha.
Right. So his mother, Belinda, has worked for this phone sex hotline for a number of years, sort of to make some extra money. And she uses this Russian accent. Everyone on the phone sex hotline uses a Russian accent. The owner of the phone sex hotline is a former Slavic studies major from Texas Tech. He really wants everyone to be Russian, Ukrainian, etc. And so X has seen his mother do this, and when the opportunity presents itself, decides to start experimenting on the phone sex hotline really is another way of exploring gender.
What really got me about this book is, we keep talking about X or Charles Rex and then his mom, Belinda. And we can sum her up very quickly, right? Former Playboy model, beautician, phone sex hotline worker. She has these labels that can be put on her. But in your debut, The Slip, you really give her a lot of time on the page. I mean, maybe only 10 pages total, but you give her the time of her backstory and the respect of her backstory. It's huge, but she does, one little thing that basically ends the main character, Nathaniel. It puts him into a lot of trouble at the end. But you give her all this time, this space, and you really build her backstory. And it's a way of writing that I haven't seen in a very, very long time. How did you come to that? How did you come to thinking about how much space to give someone like Belinda and, how much to dig into her story?
Well, I felt like every character in this book who moves the plot along, so not the real minor characters, but all of these characters deserved really to have their full stories, if not told, then at least summarized or told succinctly, because that's, a theme of the book is all of these people not being seen, right? And wanting to be seen, including Belinda. And with Belinda, her backstory emerged because she's a woman who has had a lot of bad experiences with men and has used her body to make money, sometimes in ways that she's found really fun and in other times ways she hasn't found fun. And she's so happy when she has a son because she just feels like all of these struggles that I've had, this kid is not going to go through. He can be whoever he wants to be because he's a man. And of course, she then has this son who's like, I don't think I'm a man. And her reactions to X, again, I think readers will not always be happy with her. She's a complicated person. Her parenting style is not going to be everyone's parenting style. But I wanted readers to understand how she got to where she was. So that took some backstory and some writing.
And did your editor or readers along the way, did anyone ever say, let's just cut all of this. All we need to know is she's the mom?
No, the book itself has changed many times. It took 12 years to write. It's gone through many different iterations, but the vision has always been the same and one in which all of these different characters are going to get their say. It's an ensemble piece. And so I think everyone has accepted that going in. There were obviously things I went back and forth on with my editor, but that was not one of them.
If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. My guest today is Lucas Schaefer, and we are talking about his brand new debut novel, The Slip. Towards the end of the novel, this ensemble cast that you've put together, Lucas, all comes together, all the pieces. And we find our main character, Nathaniel Rothstein, looking very, very tan, maybe able to pass for a black man, gets into a fight. The police are called, and the only ID that he has on him is a very old, expired Haitian passport. And suddenly he finds himself being treated as an immigrant. They're assuming that he is Haitian, even though he's trying to say that he's American. And really, you are digging into immigration in many, many parts in this book, but in this one in particular. Talk to me about immigration and what you're trying to do there.
So there are two intersecting immigration plot lines in this story. There's Nathaniel's story, which also involves David, and there's also a young Mexican fighter named Alexis Cepeda, who's in 2008 is an up-and-comer at Terry Tucker's boxing gym, who also has had a strange journey to the United States from Mexico. I was just interested in kind of some of the absurdities that racism and preconceived notions can lead us to in terms of immigration, because I do think one of the things about the way we talk about race in America is it leads people to like turn off their brains a little bit. And you see that here where different sort of immigration officials and police are interacting both with Alexis and Nathaniel at different points in the novel and are making assumptions about them just based on how they look, even if they don't look quite right, even if it doesn't make sense, even if Nathaniel is clearly 16 and is pretending to be someone who's much older. So, kind of experimenting and poking at that a little was one of my intentions.
I'm glad you bring up Alexis because you point out with him some of the many challenges that people might face here in the country. Would you read for us?
Sure. Alexis isn't in the country legally. He has a truck but no license, a bank account but no social security number. He can commit to fights only within driving distance. He can't get on a plane. He could fight as a Mexican national, but this would involve living in Mexico. His gym is here, his people here. The grandfather who raised him in Tampico for much of his childhood is dead. Missed the funeral, but he glances at Miriam, turns back. I think he'd understand.
So there you have Alexis, who dreams of being a boxer, but he can't fly anywhere for a fight. And you really just lay all of that out there without passing any kind of judgment either. Your characters are not saying one way or the other really how they feel. It's this is the situation. This is someone who's living in Austin and trying to be a fighter, and this is what they're facing.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Alexis, I mean, I will say, so he comes to the United States with a smuggler whose whole gimmick is dressing the people who he's smuggling up in whiteface as party clowns. So there's a mildly absurd element into how he got to the United States. But, you know, Alexis is this guy, he's kind of this goofball jock who has had really a lot of tough things happen to him and kind of just floats through the world. I mean, one of the things I wanted to do with the slip is I feel like, you know, there are so many characters who are in their heads and very cerebral. And, you know, Alexis has gone through just as much as anyone else in the book, if not more. But I do think there are these people in the world who just kind of float through the world and let things come to them, sort of water off a duck's back. And Alexis is one of these people, which sort of lets us really see what happens to him in a way, because we just, you know, as you say, I just kind of tell it.
The other story that I want to talk about in terms of immigration then takes us back again to Nathaniel. And let's talk about his arrest. And the arresting officers don't even listen to him. They see his skin. It's nighttime. For somehow, I guess he passes as black. And they see the expired passport and papers that he has on him. And they assume that he is Haitian and he needs to be sent back to Haiti. And I'm thinking, are we going there? Right? Like, are we really going there? Yes, we are. Lucas Schaefer, the author of The Slip, is taking us all the way there. How did you again go into this bonkers idea and take us to this?
You know, I really love TV shows like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul and The Sopranos. And one thing that links all three of those shows is that they're very process oriented. So if a character is killed, let's say, it's not just, okay, this character's killed, we're moving on. It's what do we do with the body? Can we put the body in acid? If we put the body in acid, will the head also disintegrate? What do we do with the head? You know, really taking seriously these sort of outlandish situations. And that was just the dynamic I wanted to bring to The Slip. I just let things build. And wherever that took me, it took me. You know, part of this book is set in Haiti, part of this book is set in Kenya. The reasons for those things is that's just where the characters took themselves sort of logically in the book's own off the wall logic. And so, yeah, I just went for it.
I'm so glad you did. I loved it. Every time I tried explaining to people what this book was about while I was reading it and where I was or what was happening, I would think to myself, I can't believe I'm saying this. And I love it. And I can't put it down. And yet this and like, wow. I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. My guest today is Lucas Schaefer, and we are talking about his brand new novel, The Slip. Lucas, how did you keep all of these pieces together and all of these characters? Did you have a spreadsheet? Did you have a web like on your wall? How did you keep track of all of it?
I did at one point have a web on my wall, like I was a detective, but it didn't really work for me. Honestly, I got to know these characters so well that it just was all in my head, basically. I at times have tried to outline things, but it doesn't typically work all that well. And some of the things came a lot later on. I mean, there's a section of this book called Leonard District in which we follow a police officer who's investigating Nathaniel's disappearance. Her name's Miriam Lopez. And we follow her over the course of the year. This is just sort of plopped into the middle of the book. And that entire section was written after I'd already sold the book, because I was like, wait a second, there's like a logical gap here. Like, someone needs to be investigating this case. Like, it doesn't make sense that it would just be sort of a left. And, okay, let's spend 3 months figuring out what her life would be like over her first year on the job. But yeah, it was all just in my head.
As I was sitting around trying to think why all these characters, how did Lucas Schaefer make all of these characters work in this book? Why was I willing to go with each of them on their crazy off the wall journeys? It occurred to me that all of us have so many people that affect our lives. There's not just one or two influences. We don't just have one mentor like Dave DeLeese. We have the Dr. Abruzzi or Mrs. Abruzzi who's in the nursing home with the magical pills that Nathaniel ends up taking. Or we have, this person who's over here who just touches you briefly, but could have a huge influence on your life. And it seemed to be that was one of the themes you wanted to show, is that there's no really one force that really works on any one life or pushes it, that we really do have a dozen people in our web, each with an influence that we maybe don't even recognize.
Yeah, I think that that's very true. And I was also interested in all of the characters in this book are so different demographically, right? They're different ages, they're different races, they're going through different things. Their immigration status is different, their economic status is different. How do we all live together in this country is like a question in the book, and a question I think a lot of us are thinking about right now. So that was part of it too. Like, where do these characters find common humanity? Where do they find mentorship, and where do they not? And it's a mix, but I thought that was an important question to explore.
Are you excited, worried? How do you feel about how this book will be received?
I'm not especially worried about it. I mean, obviously, I did not set out to offend anyone, and someone could be offended by it. But so far, obviously, it's early, but I feel like people have latched on to the themes and the questions that I'm really interested in, because I'm not sort of a contrarian character who's just out there saying, I'm writing about this because I can. I wanted to go deep into these issues, and hopefully readers will meet me there.
What do you want your readers thinking about or talking about when they put this book down?
I think I'd like readers to be thinking about these broad issues of identity, but then also about, this sounds really Pollyanna-ish, so pardon that, but I do think we're at a point where it is worth thinking about what we have in common and what kind of brings us together, while also acknowledging all of the things that drive us apart and why those tensions exist and the history behind those tensions. I think we have to do all of those things. And I think this book is, about characters who are attempting with varying levels of success to do all or some of those things.
What advice do you have for new writers?
Oh God. Just go for it. Just go for it. I always hate when this question is asked and a writer is like, if you can possibly do anything else, do that. It's like, no, we want writers. We need writers. We need people using words and putting ideas out there. So I'd say go for it. And I would also say, like, one of the things I really wanted with this book, like, you only get one first book. Who knows if I'll have a second book? I really wanted to say something, and to say something about the world that we live in and the country we live in. So I would say go for it and say something.
Lucas Schaefer, thank you so much for joining me today on Check This Out.
Thank you so much for having me, Rachel. This was really fun.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novel Atomic Anna, and you've been listening to Check This Out, where we dive deeply into the works of emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. This conversation is a partnership between New Hampshire Public Radio and the Penn Faulkner Foundation. I'll be back in the fall with a brand new slate of authors and 12 more episodes of Check This Out. Our producer today is Jessica Hunt. Penn Faulkner's executive director is Gwydion Sullivan. NHPR's program director is Emily Quirk. The show is sponsored by CNS Wholesale Grocers family of companies, the podcast Totally Booked with Zibby, the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation, and the Howe Library Corporation. Remember to go to your local library or local bookstore and check out all the books that you hear about here and love. Thanks for listening. See you next season.